Let your imagination run wild. Here it's okay to act like a child. You're an absolute gem. Thank you for clicking on my Suspect series. I'm Brooke Makenna, and today is one of my 16 days of Halloween where I'm posting every other day this month. But today's video is going to be more of an urban legend. This is because completely true stories can often be so dark and leave you in such a dark mindset that I figured for today's video I would do some stories that may or may not be true. Kind of give you a little breath of fresh air. So if you don't know, an urban legend can be a humorous or horrific story that kind of circulates around as though it is true. Now obviously I'm going to be going more towards the horrific ones since it is October, but I hope you're excited nonetheless. By the way, if you are happy that I'm doing so many videos this month, I would love your support by subscribing if you're not, by thumbsing up this video, by leaving a comment down below, anything you can do. I would love to know that you are here and you like being here. So yeah, let's get back to this story. So Elwood City, Pennsylvania is our first urban legends location. It's along Route 351 near the Piney Fork Tunnel, which is sometimes named the Green Man Tunnel because supposedly along there you can see a man, sometimes named Green Man, sometimes Charlie No Face, and sometimes the monster of Beaver County. It was a ghost story passed along from generation to generation through children, but there are many different variations. One being that a boy was burned almost alive to where his face melted like candle wax. Another was that a little boy was struck by lightning. And another was that a boy wanted to see a bird's nest, so he climbed an electric pole and was electrocuted and fell to the ground. He lost both eyes, his nose, his mouth, one ear, and one arm. He hid in an abandoned house for the rest of his life, and his face slowly turned green from the accident. It was unknown why, but some believed it had something to do with radioactive power plants in the area. But the story went that sometimes in the middle of the night, when it turned dark, you could see this man walking along Route 351 by the tunnel. And so for years, teens would go out and try to spot this man, try to see if they could see if he was real. Even those who didn't believe him would go with their friends just to see. They would all bring what they called Green Man bait, which was beer and cigarettes, something he liked. But many had no idea that this was a real man, and this urban legend was true. It was a man named Raymond Robinson who was born October 29th of 1910. He grew up in Beaver County, Pennsylvania, and had a very average childhood until one day when he was 8, in August of 1919, he was walking with his sister and his friends home from school when he saw a bird's nest. He climbed a pole on the Murado Bridge on the Beaver Falls, which was thought to be abandoned, but the electrical lines were still in use. It was up to 22,000 volts of electricity, and instead of touching the bird's nest, which he had hoped to touch, he touched that line. He was shocked by this line and he fell to the ground, and this exact thing had happened to a little boy not even a year earlier, but he had died. This boy, Ray, he lived. Doctors had no idea how he lived, and he lost both eyes, his nose, his mouth, his ears, and that was either partially or fully. But both of his arms were also maimed, and one hand, probably the one that touched the line, was completely blown off. But he was alive. After that, he was isolated from the world in his Victorian home. His family had him in a room that, in these houses, there were isolated rooms with plumbing and drains, and so it was easy to hide people, which was great because back then, if anyone was different, you had to hide them. You didn't have a choice. It got to the point where they didn't even want to acknowledge his existence anymore. They wouldn't eat with him. They wouldn't communicate with him. And so he had to find things to do on his own, because he was stuck in the house at all times. He started listening to the radio, to baseball games. He started learning to read Braille. He then used old tires to make doormats, belts, wallets to sell for the family and make some money. And as he got older, his family actually moved him to the small garage and said that that could be his home from now on. But he was getting so lonely after so many years of staying inside. And so he knew that he couldn't go out during the daytime because he was afraid of causing a panic by people seeing the way he looked. That's when he decided he would start taking walks along Route 351 in the middle of the night with a walking stick so he could tell where he was going. And that is when people began to notice him and his strangely green face. You see, his face was basically full of open wounds, and his nose was an open wound itself and often got infected, which made his face a tint of green. And then the story started spreading, and it got even creepier. It had a ghostly edge to it, and everybody thought that it wasn't real. But some who did think it was real and wanted to find him would go out and try to look for him. He at first would hide and not want to communicate with any of them, but after a while he used it to his own advantage. If they wanted to talk to him, or if they wanted a picture, all he wanted in exchange was beer and cigarettes. Some of his neighbors and people who would talk to him actually grew fond of him. They enjoyed his company and would come back and hang out with him again. But some people were just plain cruel. There were several times when he was hit with cars. People would urinate in the beer bottles that they gave him. They would pick him up to take him for a ride and then throw him out of the car somewhere he didn't know where he was. And regardless of how he looked, this was a man, a blind man, that these people were bullying. He didn't understand why they were doing this to him, but the good conversations was the only connection to the outside world he had, so he kept walking. Then in 1960, a group of friends went out to find him, and when they eventually did, down that road, they stopped, the driver got out, and he had apparently already met with the Green Man, or Charlie No Face, or Ray Robinson, and so he got out to go say something to him. A little while later, Ray began to climb in the car. One of the other passengers remembers screaming and then realizing that it was like meeting the boogeyman and it just ending up being a misunderstood guy. He said there was nothing scary about him. His appearance was just different. He was actually a beautiful, kind man. And to this day, the people who met him feel horribly of how he was treated and that they were scared of him at all. They say he was never a why me type of guy. He was never angry with his situation. And he was the type of friend and person we all wish we could be. He kept walking until his last few years when he couldn't anymore, and then he died at the Beaver County Geriatric Center at 74. So you see, many looked at him and assumed he was a monster, but he was really just a man who survived. I mean, the real monsters often seem to me like the ones with the pretty smiles, the perfect personalities, the ones you would never expect. Because they wear a mask to make sure you don't see their evil. And that's even scarier to me than a disfigured face could ever be. But the next urban legend is about a woman named Marjorie McCall. She lived with her family in a place called Church Place, Lurgan, Co-Armagh, which I know that I probably said completely wrong. But they were doing really well for themselves as a family. Her husband was a doctor, and then she fell ill. And back in the 1700s, even just a simple fever could be deadly. They were scared of any little sickness that came along because they didn't know how to treat him. And that's exactly what happened to Marjorie. She passed away of her sickness, and the town wanted her to be buried as soon as possible so that the sickness didn't spread. But the problem was there was her wedding ring on her finger that they couldn't get off. Her husband tried to get it off, friends and family at the wake tried to get it off, and it would not come off her finger because apparently she had bloated after death. And the reason they wanted it off so badly was because grave robbing was such a huge thing back then. That was the way some people made their money, and they knew if they put her in the grave with this ring, there was a possibility she would be dug back up and messed with and her ring stolen. So they really wanted to take it, but they couldn't, and the town kept pressing that she needed to be buried because she was sick. So they had to bury her, ring and all, in her grave. She was buried in Shankill Church of Ireland Cemetery, and because it was such a commotion trying to get her ring off, it actually brought attention to it. And a few days after she was buried, the grave robbers struck. They dug up the dirt, opened the coffin, and saw the ring right there. Except when they tried to pull it off, it wouldn't come off either. They looked at each other and they knew that they were not leaving that grave without the jewelry. So they decided they were going to have to cut her finger off. They began to cut, and that is when Marjorie sat up with her eyes opened and screamed. Some say one of the grave robbers actually dropped dead right there. Others say that they ran off into the woods, never to be seen again. But Marjorie climbed out of her grave and began heading back home. Her family was at home toasting her journey to a better place. And when there was knocks on the door, her father even said, "If your mother were still alive, I'd swear those were her knocks." And when he opened the door, it was her, in her burial clothes, with her bloody finger staring at him. He dropped dead right there on the ground and took the place of Marjorie McCall in the grave she was supposed to be in. Marjorie had apparently just been in a coma when she was placed in her grave and was technically buried alive. Marjorie went on to remarry and have more kids, and when she finally did die the second time, or technically the first, I'm sure they checked and then double-checked that she was really dead before burying her. Her new gravestone said lived once, buried twice. And some say that her ghost still haunts that cemetery. But the story, and Marjorie McCall is known all over as different names, one of the main ones being the Lady with the Ring. Nobody knows if this one is true or not, but it sure is a way to warn people of premature burial and to make people afraid of being buried alive. So what did you think of these legends? Are you creeped out? Are you one to be more of a skeptic or a believer? Do you really think that first one was true? Or do you think that it adds to the creepiness that it is a true story? I can't quite figure that out yet, but I did read some stories from actual people who have said that they hung out with him, so who knows? So what would you do if you saw a man without a face, or a woman who came back to life? I hope these stories interested you. I know it wasn't exactly true crime, but I hope you like stories of any kind from me. I love telling stories. If you don't know, I have written novels. I'm currently writing another one. And so stories of all kinds make me happy, and even if they're fiction. So I hope you guys enjoy this anyway. And hopefully one day I'll be able to show you stories that I have written. Let me know down below if you have any cool urban legends that you've ever heard, or any from your town that are just like smaller ones that just your community knows, because I think those are the most interesting, because they go from generation to generation no matter how small the community is. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this, and don't ever forget to speak up. Your voice is powerful enough, and I love you to absolute pieces. Okay? Do we not understand that a rumor can have an effect like a brain tumor?